Thank you, Chair. This is an area which our organisation works in quite closely, and particularly in education. So I wanted to, several of the panel members mentioned education, I wanted to draw out some issues and pose some questions to them, really. In some work we did in 2012 in South Sudan, which was not easy, just before the war escalated, we did surveys in 48 schools of pupils, parents, teachers and head teachers, and overwhelmingly, although inclusion wasn't happening, when demonstrated different models by photographs of what they preferred, overwhelmingly everybody wanted inclusive education. So the resistance isn't on the ground. That's the first thing. The resistance seems to come from governments, and it seems to come also from the problem we have with many players operating in the same space and not coordinating their action. We have, for the last 30 years, had many examples of small-scale inclusive education programs working. But when the NGOs or the donors remove their funding, it then collapses, and after a couple of years, there's nothing left to see that that project had happened in the first place. We have to get beyond that. We've had commitments from 1990, 2000, and now Sustainable Development Goals. If we're not by 2030 to be in the same position, we have to have major structural realignment of the international community to actually make the achievement of inclusive education, not just in primary school, but secondary and higher education, a major goal. Now, it is a major goal, but if we don't have the means of doing it, we're not going to get there. I would like to focus secondly on what I'm saying on a piece of work I did for UNICEF on preparing teachers for children with disabilities. And I led a team of 6, and we came up with some very interesting findings. At the moment, those findings are not in the mix that's being discussed, and yet it was clear that all teachers needed mandatory training on inclusion at 2 levels. First of all, including everyone, but secondly, the second track on being able to include children with the main forms of impairment. This is every teacher, not relying on teachers from a special ed background. Many of those teachers from a special ed background based on segregation, on seeing the problem as deficit. That is not what we want. And each time governments come to the committee and say, oh, we have special education, they are not meeting the goals of Article 24. And that needs to be much more clearly seen. We need a transformation in education. As Article 24 General Comment says, that inclusion is different to just placing children in class, which is integration, or separately. We need a transformation of the curriculum, the pedagogy, and we have support. The Education International, will represent over 40 million teachers, is in favour of inclusion. So we're pushing at a half-open door. Admittedly, on the ground, people are, if you ask teachers, will say, we don't know how to do it and we haven't got enough money. But they will always say that. What we need is an initiative which will actually develop them. If we persuade all governments that all teachers from now on need mandatory training on inclusion, and all in-service teachers need to have courses in the next 5 years which actually mean that they change their practice, we might start getting on the road. Thank you.